Let's fill out a 2024 Senate map with the latest predictions for every race. Republicans enjoy a clear fundamental edge, as Democrats must defend 23 of the 34 Senate seats up for election this November. That includes 8 of the 10 most competitive races in 3 seats in states that Trump won in both 2016 and 2020: Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. There is still a question, though, as to whether the GOP can get the job done. Their chances of flipping the majority sit at 70% in Decision Desk HQ's latest forecast. Meanwhile, according to BetOnline's Senate Control Market, we see Republican odds at minus 350, which roughly translates to a slightly greater 75 to 80% chance. Now, in today's video, I'm going to assign a rating to every single state, driven by a combination of past results, current polling, prediction markets, and demographic trends. It was this all-inclusive strategy that proved effective in 2022, as I correctly forecasted the outcome in 33 of 34 races. Alrighty, let's begin with the solid seats that neither party will really have to bat a single eyelid on. Generally speaking, safe states are those I expect either party will carry by more than 10 percentage points, and I am at least 95% confident that the candidate representing that party on the ballot will win. They each have a high degree of partisan lean in one direction, having voted for Biden or Trump by a very wide margin in the 2020 presidential race, and there are no unique circumstances at this moment that would make the party's Senate candidate run far enough behind the top of the ticket to come anywhere close to losing. Starting with the safe Democrat states down the Pacific Coast, we have Washington, where 4-term Democrat Maria Cantwell is running for re-election. She was most recently re-elected in 2018 with 58% of the votes. Now, the deep blue state of Washington has not elected a Republican to the Senate since 1994, and it voted for Joe Biden by 19 percentage points in the 2020 race. Then down in California, longtime incumbent Democrat Dianne Feinstein passed away last October, and LaFonza Butler was appointed to replace her. Butler opted against running for a full term, as several notable Democratic U.S. representatives had already entered the race to succeed Feinstein. That included LA area Congressman Adam Schiff, who advanced to the general election via the non-partisan primary, beating out Congresswomen Katie Porter and Barbara Lee. He will face Republican Steve Garvey, a former LA Dodger, in what should be an easy win for Schiff, as California voted for Biden by 29 points in 2020, and Schiff has led in all 3 polls surveyed thus far by at least 20 points. Back on our map, as for the Aloha State, Hawaii, incumbent Democrat Mazie Hirono is seeking a 3rd term. She was reelected in 2018 with 71% of the votes. That was the largest share for a candidate in either party in that cycle. Let's head over to New Mexico now, where 2-term Democrat Martin Heinrich was reelected in 2018 with 54% of the vote in a 3-candidate race. Heinrich is now running for a 3rd term, 4 years after Biden comfortably won New Mexico by 11 points, and the polling average here also shows him with a strong advantage, sitting at exactly 10 points right now. And so with all of that, New Mexico is another safe blue state here on the map. Up in Minnesota, Democratic incumbent Amy Klobuchar was reelected in 2018 with 60% of the votes. She is running for a 4th term in office and has won each of her previous Senate contests by more than 20 percentage points. Now, Minnesota is a pretty competitive state in presidential elections. The latest polling average between Trump and Harris has the vice president leading by less than 5 points. But with a powerhouse like Klobuchar on the ballot, Democrats don't really have to worry about the Senate contest. It's a similar story down in Virginia, a secondary battleground on the presidential map. The Senate race is safe blue, as 2-term incumbent Senator Tim Kaine, who was Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016, was reelected in 2018 with 57% of the votes. And here you see every single poll surveying this race has shown him up comfortably. He leads by an average of 10.2% right now. Again, a situation where we see Trump strongly overperforming at the top of the ticket. Democrats should also hold a bunch of states up here in the Northeast, starting in New York, where incumbent Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand is running for a 3rd full term. She was most recently reelected in 2018 with 67% of the vote. New York Republicans nominated NYPD detective Mike Sapercone as their candidate to challenge Gillibrand, and while there is substantial evidence to suggest that New York is generally trending to the right, he will still face a serious uphill battle in this Biden plus 23 23 states. Then as for the states of Vermont and Massachusetts, the two bluest states in the nation in 2020, where Biden won by 35 and 33 points, respectively, we have two of his Democratic challengers from that primary, independent Bernie Sanders, who caucuses with Democrats, and Elizabeth Warren. Both are expected to easily hold these seats in November. Then in Rhode Island and Connecticut, both states have three-term incumbents running for re-election, Sheldon Whitehouse and Chris Murphy. They were both reelected in 2018 by greater than 20 points, and Harris should win both of these states comfortably as well. Closing out the New England region, up in Maine, two-term incumbent Angus King is one of the most popular senators in the country. Like Bernie Sanders, he is an independent who caucuses with Democrats, so this goes down as a quasi-hold for the Democratic Party. Finally, moving right on down to the mid-Atlantic region, starting in New Jersey, incumbent Democrat Bob Menendez is going to jail on corruption charges, and the Democratic nominee, Congressman Andy Kim, is heavily favored to succeed him, as New Jersey did vote for Biden by 16 points in 2020, and Kim is a relatively popular candidate. Now, our final state in this category is Delaware. Incumbent Democrat Tom Carper is retiring, but unlike its neighbor to the east, Maryland, which we'll get to here in a second, Republicans don't have a big-name candidate to challenge Delaware's lone U.S. representative, Lisa Blunt Rochester, as she ascends to the Senate in Biden's D+19 home state. Alrighty, 14 Democratic holds are on the board now as the party total has been lifted all the way up to 42 seats. That's 8 shy of the minimum required to maintain their majority. That is, if Kamala Harris wins the presidential race and her running mate Tim Walz retains the tie-breaking votes. However, if Trump wins, Democrats would then need to secure 51 seats to ensure a majority, leaving no room for error, and you'll see why as we go through the safe Republican states. Before we move on though, just a quick reminder that less than 20% of you are currently subscribed. Take a second to click that red button below, it's completely free and helps me out a ton. Thanks a lot. The first solid red state here is Utah. Republicans nominated Congressman John Curtis to succeed outgoing Senator Mitt Romney, who probably would have still lost in the primary had he decided to run after he voted to impeach Trump twice. Utah has not elected a Democrat to the Senate in 50 years. Then over in Wyoming and Nebraska's regular election, two-term Republicans John Barrasso and Deb Fischer were both reelected in 2018 by significant margins and are both running for a third term in these solid Trump states. That being said, the Deb Fischer race has become a little more interesting in recent weeks, with a couple of recent polls out showing a very, very close race between herself and independent Dan Osborne. Now, I highly doubt that Fischer goes down here, as unpopular as she is, even in her own party, but there's still enough uncertainty for me to move the rating into likely territory. That is not the case in the special election being held here simultaneously, where Pete Ricketts is running as an unelected incumbent. His opponent is a Democrat with a less than 1% chance of winning per the DDHQ forecast. Moving on, both North Dakota and Missouri feature one-term incumbents, Kevin Cramer and Josh Hawley, who unseated Democrats in 2018. Cramer defeated Heidi Heitkamp by an 11-point margin, and then Hawley defeated Claire McCaskill by 6 points. Now, both should win second terms by much wider margins, running as incumbents now and in a presidential year, as North Dakota and Missouri are both deep red Trump states. Then in the South, in Mississippi and Tennessee, neither state has elected a Democrat to the Senate since the 80s. Republican incumbents Roger Wicker and Marsha Blackburn should keep it that way when all is said and done. Then up in the Midwest, in the state of Indiana, Republican Congressman Jim Banks is almost certain to succeed outgoing incumbent Mike Braun, who chose to run for governor instead of re-election. Indiana voted for Trump by 16 points in 2020, and Democrats are not seriously contesting this seat here in 2024. Finally, in deep red West Virginia, incumbent Democratic Senator Joe Manchin's retirement all but secured this GOP flip. And to put the cherry on top, Republicans nominated popular Governor Jim Justice, who should win by 30 to 40 points come November. Now that brings the Republican total up to 48 seats, 2 shy of a majority with a Trump win, and even just 3 shy with a Trump loss. As I had mentioned at the start of the video, Democrats are faced with the difficult task of defending 8 of the remaining 10 competitive seats, including 2 in the Trump-won states of Montana and Ohio, and 5 more in states that Joe Biden won by less than 3 percentage points in 2020: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The only Republican-held seats remaining are in Texas and Florida. Those are the only semi-plausible opportunities for Democrats to go play offense, as otherwise they will be playing defense in as many states as possible. On that note, it's important to remember that these Senate races are being held simultaneously with the presidential race, which makes it highly likely that split-ticket voting will decline even further from the already record lows that we have seen in recent races. By that I mean that fewer voters are choosing candidates from different parties for different offices. In 2020, for example, just 3 of the 34 Senate candidates over or underperformed their party's presidential candidate by more than 10 points. And right now, there are only 5 senators representing states won by the other party in the 2020 presidential race. One of those is Susan Collins of Maine, who is the only senator elected in a state simultaneously won by the other party's presidential candidate since 2012. That pattern is, of course, mostly driven by the political polarization that we are seeing driving Democrats and Republicans further apart, leading to partisanship becoming the ultimate factor in determining how someone will vote. And considering how many seats the Democrats must defend on this map, that makes their prospects of maintaining their already narrow 51 to 49 seat majority incredibly slim. Let's now take a look, though, at the remaining races that lean strongly toward one party. The following likely states are those where one candidate is heavily favored, but where an upset is not out of the question like it is in the safe states. On the Democratic side, Maryland fits that bill. It is one of the bluest states in the nation, as it did vote for Biden by 33 percentage points in 2020. And it has not elected a Republican to the Senate in more than 40 years. So clearly, the fact that it is only labeled as likely on this map means there must be a special circumstance, and that is that the 3-term Democratic Senator Ben Cardin is retiring, and Republicans nominated former Governor Larry Hogan. Not only did Hogan win 2 statewide elections as a Republican in Maryland, but he left office in 2023 as one of the most popular governors in the country, with a near 80% approval rating. That is practically unheard of in today's environment, and a big reason why his entry into the race has been a cause of concern for Democrats. Their nominee, Angela Alsobrooks, is neither a strong nor a weak candidate per se, and the polls do still show her leading by a pretty strong margin, 7.6% per Real Clear Polling's average. Hogan is simply facing near impossible odds here in a state that Trump will probably lose by around 30 points. For Hogan to overperform Trump by that much, it would be the most insane thing I've ever seen in politics. A loss by single digits would be impressive enough. The other state I have in the likely column is Nevada, also for the Democratic Party. It's hard to overlook how well the incumbent, Jackie Rosen, is performing in the polls right now. She leads by an average of more than 8.5 points, according to the average of the last 6 polls, 3 of which show her ahead by double digits. That's quite remarkable, especially when you consider that Kamala Harris only leads Trump by 1.4% on average and has even trailed in some of these polls over the past few weeks. To be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure what is driving this disparity. It's not as if the Republican nominee, Sam Brown, is a weak candidate. He's a U.S. Army veteran with no significant scandals, and Nevada has generally trended to the right in recent election cycles. That said, I do expect these polls to tighten and revert back to the mean as we get closer to Election Day. I fully expect Rosen to outperform Harris, but I find it hard to believe that she'll do so by 7 points or more. Still, unless Brown starts to consistently close the gap soon, time is running out before voters head to the polls. With that said, let's move on to the lean states now, where one party has an edge with around a 60 to 75% chance of winning. Starting with the Republican Party, I'm downgrading Texas from likely to lean Republican, and Florida as well, due to some very positive momentum for Democrats in recent polls. In Florida, incumbent Republican Senator Rick Scott was first elected in 2018 by the narrowest of margins, 50.1% to 49.9%. Now, he is expected to win by a more comfortable margin this November after Florida has trended hard to the right since then. Donald Trump notably increased his margin in the state between 2016 and 2020, one of only 5 states where that happened. And then in the 2022 midterms, Governor Ron DeSantis was reelected by a whopping 19 points, while Senator Marco Rubio also was reelected by 16, both impressive landslides by Florida standards. As for 2024, polling consistently shows Scott leading his Democratic opponent, former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. However, the margin has shrunk to just 4.3%, with the latest poll from The Hill and Emerson College showing a mere 1-point gap, well within the margin of error. Now, this does seem to suggest that Scott could underperform Trump in Florida, which I personally find hard to believe considering that he is the incumbent senator and is not especially unpopular, at least not like Ted Cruz is over in Texas. On that note, the two-term Republican incumbent Cruz is running for re-election in Texas. You either love him or you hate him. He had a close call in 2018, winning re-election by less than 3 points against popular Democrat Beto O'Rourke. He now faces another Democratic congressman in Colin Allred, who has not quite captured the same magic as Beto, nor the funding for that matter, but the polls have nevertheless gotten a bit closer, with Cruz up exactly 5 points on average right now. He is not led by double digits since early July, before which he more often than not led by at least 10 points. As opposed to Scott, though, over in Florida, it would not surprise me if Cruz does underperform the top of the ticket here, though I doubt that it would be enough for it to actually matter considering Trump should carry Texas by at least 5 to 6 points. Now, with those two states, Republicans secure exactly 50 seats, which again would be enough to take control of the Senate if they also reclaim the White House. Just 6 states remain in play, all of which are currently held by Democrats: Arizona, Montana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Even if Kamala Harris holds the presidency for the Democratic Party, it would take nothing short of a miracle for them to retain all 6 of these seats in their caucus. We'll start in Arizona. The incumbent is independent Kyrsten Sinema, who caucuses with Democrats in the Senate. She opted against seeking another term, setting up a head-to-head race between Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego and 2022 Republican nominee for Governor Kari Lake. Now, like its neighbor in the Southwest, Nevada, this is a race in which Democrats have to feel good about given the polling. Gallego currently leads by an average of 5.8% according to the last 10 polls, which range from Gallego +2 to Gallego +13. While that is a pretty wide range of results, the consistent takeaway is that Lake has not led in a single poll dating all the way back to January. Democrats are also currently enjoying a winning streak in Arizona as Joe Biden flipped the state blue in 2020, marking the first Democratic presidential win here since 1996. In addition, Democrats have also won the 2018 and 2020 U.S. Senate races, as well as the 2022 race for governor where Kari Lake lost, and the U.S. Senate contest as well. Given this trend and Gallego's current polling advantage, I am placing Arizona in the lean Democrat category. Let's now shift our focus over to the Great Lakes region, where we have 4 closely contested Senate races, including the key battlegrounds of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Often simply referred to as the WIMPA trio, 3 of the most crucial states on the presidential electoral map. Starting in Wisconsin, two-term incumbent Democrat Tammy Baldwin is seeking a 3rd term. She was comfortably reelected in 2018 by an 11-point margin, but Wisconsin is notoriously competitive in presidential years. In fact, 4 of the last 6 presidential elections in Wisconsin have been decided by less than a point, including both of the last 2. Donald Trump carried Wisconsin by 0.7% in 2016, and then Biden flipped it back by just 0.6% in 2020. While Republicans currently control both chambers of the state legislature and hold a supermajority in Wisconsin's U.S. House delegation, Democrats have recently found success in statewide races. In 2022, Governor Tony Evers outperformed the polls by more than 4 points to win re-election. And then in 2023, a highly politicized Supreme Court election centered around abortion rights went the liberal justice's way by 11 points. That leads us to this 2024 race, where Baldwin, like Jackie Rosen in Nevada, enjoys a fundamental advantage as a reasonably popular incumbent. She also consistently leads her Republican challenger, Eric Hovde, by an average of 3.6% across the last 7 polls. The range in polling is again pretty wide, from D+1 to D+7, but like Gallego in Arizona, she has led Hovde in every single poll going all the way back to February. Baldwin has also consistently outperformed Kamala Harris at the presidential level in these polls, just as almost every other Democratic Senate candidate across these battlegrounds. As long as Harris can stay within a point or two of Trump here, where she has actually been polling the best out of the key presidential battlegrounds, Baldwin should be in a strong position. I'm also placing it in the lean blue category. Next is Michigan. Four-term incumbent Democrat Debbie Stabenow is retiring, leaving Democrats more vulnerable than they otherwise would have been in another key presidential battleground. This will be the first open Senate race for this seat since 1994, which happens to also be the last time that Republicans won a Michigan Senate race. Now, Joe Biden did carry Michigan by almost 3 percentage points in the 2020 presidential race. Democrats currently control both U.S. Senate seats and all statewide offices. That fundamental edge, plus the fact the Democratic nominee, Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, has a history of overperforming fundamentals in past House races, does give the party an edge here over Republican nominee, former Congressman Mike Rogers. Slotkin enjoys a massive fundraising advantage, and that is translated to another strong polling edge as well. She leads by 4.4% here in the Real Clear average of the last 9 polls. Again, this is another race where we've almost never seen the Republican lead in any one survey. And so back on our map, it continues the lean blue trend. Over in Pennsylvania now, incumbent Democrat Bob Casey Jr. is a total powerhouse. He has won 6 consecutive statewide elections in the Keystone State, dating back to 1996, when he was first elected as state auditor. Casey was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006, defeating then-incumbent Republican Senator Rick Santorum by 18%, the largest margin ever for a Democratic Senate nominee in Pennsylvania's history. He then went on to win re-election by 9 points in 2012 and an even larger 12 points in 2018. So given Casey's track record, while Pennsylvania is arguably the most important state in the presidential race between Trump and Harris, the Senate race has received far less attention. Casey is expected to run several points ahead of Harris, who herself is unlikely to lose Pennsylvania by more than a point or two. In terms of polling, Casey holds a 4-point lead over Republican nominee David McCormick, according to the average of the last 11 polls. Again, not a single one of these polls shows McCormick ahead, dating back to March, so unsurprisingly, Pennsylvania also leans blue on the Senate map. That leaves us with the Dem-held, yet Trump-won states of Ohio and Montana. Both are prime pickup opportunities for the Republican Party, as the incumbents will both need to outperform Kamala Harris by significant margins. Sherrod Brown has the slightly easier task in Ohio, where Trump carried the state by 8 points in 2020. It has gone from the ultimate bellwether state to strongly Republican-leaning in the Trump era, as Republicans also control Ohio's other U.S. Senate seats, all statewide offices, and a majority in its U.S. House delegation. Perhaps the most dismal data point, though, of all for Democrats is the failed Senate candidacy of Congressman Tim Ryan in 2022. He was widely considered to be the ideal candidate for Democrats to claim victory in that year's open Senate contest, yet the broadly well-liked, moderate Tim Ryan still lost by 6 percentage points to Trump's now running mate, J.D. Vance. Now here in 2024, the 3-term incumbent Brown is facing his toughest re-election yet. He has long thrived on his ability to attract cross-party support, but the key question now is whether Republican-leaning voters, who like Brown personally, will continue to support him or opt for their preferred national party, especially with Trump at the top of the ticket. On the Republican side, car dealership owner Bernie Moreno claimed victory in the closely contested primary thanks to Trump's endorsement. Most analysts viewed Moreno as the weakest general election candidate for the GOP, and he has trailed Brown in every head-to-head poll. However, Brown's lead has narrowed to just 3.7% in the last 4 polls, bringing the race closer to the margin of error. It's important to note here that polling in Ohio has consistently underestimated Republicans in statewide races since 2016. Trump outperformed 538's averages by 6 points in 2016 and by 8 points in 2020. And then in 2022, Tim Ryan did lead J.D. Vance for much of that cycle before, again, ultimately losing. Now this 2024 Senate race will come down again to how far ahead of Harris Brown can run, as the vice president will likely lose to Trump in Ohio by around 8 to 10 points. I personally tend to be skeptical of candidates' split ticket abilities these days, which is why I have Ohio tilting toward Moreno and the Republican Party at this very moment. Now if Brown is still consistently pulling ahead by late October, that could change. For what it's worth, though, the betting markets reflect a similar outlook. BetOnline currently has Brown and Moreno at even odds, -115 each, making this essentially a 50-50 race. That does lift Republicans up to a presidential race-proof majority with 51 seats, before we even get to Montana, which is far and away the most difficult seat for Democrats to hold, apart from West Virginia, of course. There have been some signals over the last few days from the Democratic Party that it may already be out of reach here, as they have started redirecting funds to try and flip Texas and Florida as a last-ditch attempt to hit 50 seats. Ultimately, Montana is just a fundamentally solid Republican state. It has not voted for a Democratic presidential candidate since Bill Clinton in 1996, and Republicans have secured each of the last 3 presidential races by double digits. Democrats' only saving grace here is the fact that the 3-term incumbent Democrat Jon Tester is running to serve a 4th, and he is one of the most popular senators in the country. Yet again, with it being a presidential year, and Tester having never won a race by more than 5 points, you can see why this is a prime pickup opportunity for the Republican Party. They nominated retired Navy SEAL turned businessman Tim Sheehy, an unproblematic candidate compared to some of the Republican nominees of the last few cycles, which makes things even more difficult for Tester. And with almost just a month to go until Election Day, Sheehy leads by more than 5 points on average across the last 4 polls. Now, Montana is not quite as red as Maryland is blue. Tester will probably only have to outperform Biden by somewhere between 15 to 20 points. That's not an impossible task. In fact, he did outperform Barack Obama by 18 points in 2012. But again, it's becoming harder and harder to do with every passing cycle. I have Montana in the lean Republican column here, trending towards likely territory, and that brings Republicans up to their final projected total of 52 seats, leading Democrats 48. It'll be well worth keeping a close eye on the polls in each of these lean blue states over the next few weeks as to whether the Republican candidates can climb back into the race and potentially expand that majority. While for Democrats to have a shot here, they'll not only need Brown to hold his current polling advantage in Ohio, but also hope for a miracle in Montana, Texas, and Florida. As always, you can feel free to comment your thoughts and feelings about this map in the comment section below. I appreciate all positive or negative comments. Also, make sure to let me know down there what other 2024 related videos you would like to see in the future. Shout out to my channel members in the description below. Make sure to subscribe while you're down there, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.